care about, but never anything like you're going through.
Sacrifice them to China.
8 seconds is the standard attention span now.
Did you say 8 seconds?
Yeah, it used to be several minutes, and now it's 8 seconds.
Mine is probably like 5 seconds.
Who do you think I am? What do you think I do?
I guess my niche now is that I'm some sort of a conspiracy theorist. That's just a loaded term that the CIA...
Pause. I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm gonna let you finish, but I'm gonna stop you right there.
A lab in Wuhan.
What if the Earth is shaped like a pierogi? No more games! The real thing! Ah!
You feel it too, don't you?
Maybe hell is on Earth, and it's being a f***ing loser animal with a knife on your head.
Bring me the powder! To get the job done!
It's been 5 years, 72 days, and 18 hours. For 10 years, we lived and died together. You couldn't possibly understand.
You say that like soldiers and humanity are two different things. And soldiers aren't machines. We're just people.
Me, the government. I'm here to make sure you and your daughter back here. Me, the government again. I want to take your gun because I'm going to do things you guys definitely shouldn't do. Against the police. Give me your guns because you're lower hanging fruit than actual criminals. What's a grooming gang?
The level of admiration I actually have for China.
Why'd you defect?
Their basic dictatorship.
I don't want that kind of world.
And I have to be here to say this because many of the people from my platoon that were killed aren't here to say that anymore. They're all dead. It's not the country that I signed up to fight for, and it is certainly not the country that those men and women died for. So I guess I'm the bad guy now. If that's how it's going to be, then that's how it's going to be.
You dare enter my realm.
I'm not going to stand here and somehow defend that I actually do love Canada.
Ha! You lie!
Do you feel inside?
Boom!
You are not prepared.
Your ancestors in Auschwitz probably don't even disapprove of Hitler and what he did as much as I did.
Remember this guy? The other right?
What are you really after?
I will hack into your mind. Your biomass is merely hardware for me to control.
Don't flatter me, robot. We're not friends.
Now do you remember who you are?
I'm actually a man.
You know who's going to align with you completely? A man with Asperger's.
The world needed men like us.
Not just today, but every day.
Guys, it's me from anime. Let's go.
The guy in the background saying karate.
That's so dumb. Why are you doing this?
A self-documentation of one man's descent into madness.
Nick, what's going on, big guy?
This fake dichotomy, this fake divide, it's not cutting it. It doesn't explain our world, and it doesn't give answers for the problems in our world.
Carving out our own world, making our own future. And they took it away.
If you ban our accounts, we will make new ones.
I've lost people I care about, but never anything like you're going through.
Sacrifice them to China.
8 seconds is the standard attention span now.
Did you say 8 seconds?
Yeah, it used to be several minutes, and now it's 8 seconds.
Mine is probably like 5 seconds.
Who do you think I am? What do you think I do?
I guess my niche now is that I'm some sort of a conspiracy theorist. That's just a loaded term that the CIA...
Pause. I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm gonna let you finish, but I'm gonna stop you right there.
A lab in Wuhan.
What if the Earth is shaped like a pierogi? No more games! The real thing! Ah!
You feel it too, don't you?
Maybe hell is on Earth, and it's being a f***ing loser animal with a knife on your head.
Bring me the powder! To get the job done!
It's been 5 years, 72 days, and 18 hours. For 10 years, we lived and died together. You couldn't possibly understand.
You say that like soldiers and humanity are two different things. And soldiers aren't machines. We're just people.
Me, the government. I'm here to make sure you and your daughter back here. Me, the government again. I want to take your gun because I'm going to do things you guys definitely shouldn't do. Against the police. Give me your guns because you're lower hanging fruit than actual criminals.
Need your help.
I'm going to the underground base. We're out of time.
Quickly, we need to get off the ship.
Get the Ark out of here!
Negative. You're trapped.
What are you doing?
Protocol 3. I will not lose another pilot.
The deadly beasts of Dungeons and Dragons!
Brace for impact. I will meet you on the other side.
We might not meet again.
Uphold the mission.
You'll have to protect yourself now.
Proceed forward with caution.
All right, welcome to the show, guys. Today's a very special episode. I'm here with Jeff. Jeff, can we hear you okay?
I can hear me okay.
Okay, you're showing up on the audio level, so I think that's good. It's always a bit of a mystery as to whether we'll have a show without any sort of technical glitches or anything. And again, the problem is always, if you're not doing it regularly, there's so many things that can slip through the cracks. But so today what we're going to be covering is, one, you have a topic that you want to discuss at a point, but also we're going to be doing a premiere of a video that I put a good deal of work into about the hidden meaning of the video game Subnautica. What would you prefer to do first, Jeff? Do you want to discuss your topic? Well, first let's figure out what your topic is.
It's related, but then tangentially related. But one of the themes that we're talking about in Subnautica is Gnosticism.
Right.
And I guess I have a little bit of a tangent that I want to get into regarding my own dealings with Gnosticism.
Do you feel like the premiere video will be a good, it'll provide good groundwork for what it is that you want to discuss, or will you need to?
I think so, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll watch the video first, and then we'll go over the content that you want to discuss. So now you've seen this video before. You've seen this video, but anyone from YouTube hasn't. I have uploaded it to Alt Tech sources. So, my mic is low. Let me see here. Hopefully this is a little bit better. I have uploaded it to Alt Tech. So people who are on Odyssey or Gab TV, they may have already seen this, but for YouTube, this is going to be a little bit new. A bit of background with this video is, I've always said that I think my best work was the Lego movie analysis, and I've planned to do another analysis, which was going to be about the movie Free Guy. And while I was relaxing at one point, I decided to play Subnautica again. I decided to try it or whatever. And I started to realize what was going on. And initially this video was, it's like, okay, there's like 4 main ideas. And I'll just make a quick little explainer video. It'll be like a 5-minute video explaining how Subnautica is this thing. And it ended up kind of getting out of control. And I don't know how many hours I put into it, but it was a long time. This video was a lot of work. So I'm really excited to finally show it.
Isn't it interesting, though, that in Subnautica, you find the same theme as you found in Free Guy, which is the same theme you found in the Lego movie?
Right.
Many such cases, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm definitely like, I have to be really careful that I don't try and cram puzzle pieces together that don't fit. Like, I think that I have this model in my brain that's like, so there's the Garden of Eden and there's the Christian gospel, and every other narrative and every other story fits into that in some way. Like, in some way, it's either it parallels it, or it contradicts it, or inverts it, or, you know, you could compare every story to that. But I have this kind of model now where I have to be really careful that I'm not just trying to shove stories into that model and reading into things that aren't really there. And I wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case with this video, or with this game. But I'm definitely very carefully selecting the the entertainment that I'm analyzing because I think that they fit into these categories so easily. And I'm kind of ignoring ones that I think I would have to force. But I think that between the Lego Movie, Free Guy, and this one, it's definitely there.
I guess it's because there's also always this eternal tension and desire to not accept what is given.
Right.
So, especially in modern times when we have advanced technology to the level that it is, it's very easy to it's very tempting to say, okay, well, this was a limitation we couldn't push past before, but now we can.
Hmm.
And then, technological maximalists will always say, if we can do it, then it's inevitable. We're going to do it.
Right. If we can, it will happen eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did enjoy this one too, because my impression of Free Guy versus the Lego Movie was that Free Guy was kind of like the same ideas or the same stories. It was just kind of, it was further down the rabbit hole of Gnosticism. And I found myself having to learn more about that belief system in order to be able to adequately analyze it, which is why that video is taken, why that video isn't out yet, and instead this one is. But this one is almost like so superficial. The story is so simple that it relates much easier. But Jeff, do you find this when you look into some of these belief systems that they're just like, they're such a mess? And I thought I understood them initially going into it, but there's that kind of like Dunning-Kruger effect where once you start to engage with it, you realize how much you don't know. And the more you try and wrap your head around it, the more you discover that like all these different groups understand these things completely different. And it's in no way as easy as you initially thought it was. Do you ever find that?
At the same time, there's certainly common threads. One is this kind of dialectic between the spiritual world and the material world.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Gnostic worldviews, a lot of Eastern worldviews, Platonism, in Kabbalah to some degree, hold this view that the material world, and in some ways it does play off the Christian metaphysic as well. They all hold this view that the material world is bad. It's kind of like a trap, right?
Right.
That you have to transcend the material world, basically.
Right. And
it's different from the Christian metaphysic.
Yeah, and not that I want to like spoil the discussion that you want to have at the end related to Gnosticism, but there is like the belief that when Christianity takes a certain perspective that basically life on earth is crappy, and man, I can't wait until we all die and go to heaven. That could be described as a Gnostic worldview, because like this sort of endless looking towards the future, looking towards heaven, embedded in that is the idea that, well, the material world is bad, and that's what it is that we're trying to escape. And that's a Gnostic view. The Christian worldview is, no, creation was created good, and yeah, it's corrupted, but it's still good.
And also, what we do on Earth matters.
Yes. Yeah. I also, what I enjoy or appreciate about this video that we did here is, I think this is the most coherent explanation of the Saturn Cube that I've ever encountered.
Which one?
The analysis video that we're going to go over today.
Okay.
So what had happened was, as I was playing Subnautica and pulling apart the themes and everything, I bumped into the Saturn Cube. I knew that the Saturn Cube was a part of this plot. And I was just like, how am I going to explain this? Because I've spent hours and hours poring over, whatever these these weird corners of the internet trying to understand the Saturn Cube. And I reached out to you, and I reached out to Clown Wizard and asked if you guys could both provide like just a paragraph explanation, the most simplified explanation of the Saturn Cube possible, because I didn't know how I was going to do it, and I wanted to hear how other people did it too. And between the three of us,
I think this is the most coherent explanation I've ever come across.
Is kind of a problem though, because different religions do have different views of Saturn.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. At least on this sort of like layperson level, when we're like, don't trust the cube. At least I think we have an explainer that's, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes that explains what it is without it being too complicated. All right, should we get started here?
Okay.
All right. People should be able to see it. We're gone. Yep. Feel free to ask to interrupt the video at any point too. Here we go.
Will I be able to hear the audio?
Oh shoot. Okay. Yeah, I should fix that. Give me a minute here. Now, there's always a way that it works and a way that it doesn't. Okay. Can you see and hear that, Jeff? All right. You wouldn't be able to hear it.
I can see it.
You can see it. Okay. Can you hear this?
It's playing right now? You can hear it, yeah.
You can hear it? Okay, we're good. Hello. Subnautica is an open-world survival game that was released in 2014. It was well received, offering a fresh premise and an imaginative bioluminescent world. The gameplay experience is compelling, as it contrasts relaxing and beautiful shallows, while also flirting with thalassophobia and monsters in the unknown.
We shouldn't have gone so deep.
Here's the plot. The game starts with your character crash landing on a planet covered almost entirely by water. You swim around scavenging equipment and materials in order to survive. You discover that your contact with the world has infected you with a bacteria that is threatening the entire planet, and that a precursor civilization is responsible for this, and they failed to find a cure. The precursor civilization set up now uninhabited facilities that are scattered throughout the aquatic planet. One of these facilities contains a still functioning automated cannon that quarantines the planet to and from space travelers in order to prevent the spread of the infectious bacteria into the rest of the universe. As the game progresses, you acquire better and better technology, which allows you to delve deeper and deeper underwater to discover the planet's mysteries, where you eventually find an ancient leviathan that you collaborate with in order to release immunity from the infectious bacteria onto the entire planet. Once this is achieved, you're able to disable the automated cannon that's quarantining the planet, and you fly away into space with the cure, and then the game ends. Now, those who have beaten Subnautica and who are already familiar with my LEGO movie analysis may have spotted a pattern. I explained in the LEGO movie analysis how the plot was an allegory for an inverted retelling of the Garden of Eden, with God as the tyrant villain and the serpent being depicted as the hero for gifting humanity with the forbidden fruit that grants intellect, free will, and transhumanist ascension. Subnautica is another analogy for the same story. It acts as another Luciferian tract. You collaborate with an ancient leviathan to cure a corrupted planet so that you can escape the confines of a quarantine and ascend to your place among the stars. I'm a little unsure whether the developers did this deliberately, or whether consciously or unconsciously humanity just keeps telling the same stories over and over. But before you assume this is just another satanic panic, let's analyze the game more thoroughly. The main character's name is Riley Robinson. Riley means either brave or island meadow, which is an appropriate contrast in a game about an aquatic planet. Robinson comes from son of Robin, with Robin meaning fame or bright. Robinson could also be a nod to Robinson Crusoe, but the name Robin is important enough to the developers that the protagonist of the Subnautica sequel has Robin in her name also. So Bright shows up in the names of both protagonists, even though they're not related. So Riley Robinson, or Brave Son of Bright, was aboard a ship called the Aurora. Aurora means light in the sky or dawn, and in Roman mythology, Aurora was the goddess of the dawn. She was also the mother of Lucifer, Lucifer being light bringer or morning star. So the goddess of dawn, mother of Lucifer, is transporting the son of bright through space until they are shot down and crash on a planet. I'm just going to pause here. This was one of those things where I go into in the analysis, I wasn't sure whether it was deliberate or not, what they were doing in the game. I wasn't sure whether they accidentally told this inverted gospel or whether it was deliberate. But it's always crazy when you start to really dig into like the names and why things are called what they are. And you're like, wait, no, this is pretty thoughtful. Like there's no way all of this was accidental.
Unless maybe the characters were based on people they knew in real life and they knew 2 Robins or something.
I guess.
Unless there's like a longer link of coincidences.
But it's like, okay, so I'm willing to say that, yeah, maybe Robin is a coincidence, that they're just someone that they know. But like Robin meaning bright being transported by the mother of Lucifer, crash landing on a planet. It's like that starts to get to be too many. Anyway, let's keep going here. Parallels the biblical account of how the devil, described by many names, was an angel thrown out of heaven for leading a rebellion against God. Similarly, the player's character is cast down from space and crash lands on the planet. You could say that the planet is trapped in the 5th day of creation, with birds and sea creatures, but no evidence of land animals or humans native to the planet. The planet is also corrupted by a bacterial infection called Kara, which is the fault of the precursors, who also set up the cannon that shot down the spaceship. This is an important feature when we compare it to the 2 different interpretations of the Garden of Eden. In the conventional interpretation, a perfect God creates the world and calls it good. Humanity walks closely with God in the paradise of the garden, where they can choose to either obey or disobey him. He tells them not to eat the forbidden fruit because it will cause them to die, and with a little prompting from the serpent, they choose to disobey God and eat it. This separates humanity from God and causes sin and death to enter the world. God later intervenes in history by coming to earth as Jesus Christ in order to die by crucifixion, to defeat death by resurrecting, and to return anyone to God who yields their life to him, and to judge anyone who doesn't. Or in the inverted interpretation, God, who is sometimes referred to as the Demiurge, is an evil tyrant who crafted the material world. Since he is bad, what he makes is also bad because it reflects him. Rather than being paradise, in Eden, humans were the Demiurge's slaves, with no free will until the serpent liberated humanity by offering them the forbidden fruit. God, or the Demiurge, had told them not to eat it, not because he knew better, but because he didn't want them to break free of his control over them, since he wanted to rule over them and treat them kind of like their Lego toys forever. Rather than causing sin and death to enter the world, when humanity ate the forbidden fruit, it granted them free will, intellect, and the ability to forever evolve upwards, achieving transhumanism. People will become gods themselves if they haven't yet realized that they are already. So essentially the world is bad, it's God's fault, and the serpent is the good guy for teaching humans how to fix God's dilapidated creation. Contrast to the world was good, it's humanity and the serpent's fault that it became corrupted, but God has offered a solution to anyone who is interested and judgment for those who aren't. When it comes to Subnautica,
I had a conversation this morning with Bucklander, who people who watch some of my stuff on YouTube will be familiar with. And he said something really interesting to me, which is that in a way we can look at many, if not all, forms of rebellion today as a type of impatience, a type of wanting to manifest what God already promised us, but wanting that now. If we look at the Garden of Eden, they wanted the knowledge of good and evil now.
Right.
So it's like, okay, let's eat the apple. And then if we look at something like defeating death, it's the same thing. We want to do it. We want it now. So we have to develop all of this transhumanist stuff, right?
Right.
So every form is kind of like, it's just this human patience.
Yeah, I've heard this idea that essentially, like, it was always God's intention for humanity to eventually eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Eden. Like basically, once he created humanity, they were, even though physically they may have been adults, humanity was so young. It was like really naive and very childlike in that sense. And yeah, the intention was for humanity to eventually eat the fruit, but only once they were effectively mature enough. And humanity jumped the gun and was disobedient, and that, that's what created the problems there. But
When you think about when we're raising kids, we don't teach them about the birds and the bees until a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
Then you think about what God knows and wants to teach us. We can't just say, "Oh, I'm an adult now. I'm 18. Show me all the truth, God."
Right. Yeah. Yep. Let's keep going here. It takes place on a planet that was corrupted by the same entity that trapped you there, but you eventually discover that you can fix it if you can figure out how to collaborate with the Emperor Leviathan, who communicates to you telepathically. I feel like that essentially makes enough of a case that this is a Luciferian tract, condemning God and promoting the serpent as the hero, but let's keep going. In order to find the Sea Emperor Leviathan, you have to explore the ancient uninhabited precursor structures. These structures contain teleporters, since the precursors could manipulate the fabric of the material plane. The precursor structure's primary architectural aesthetic is the shape of a cube, often with tentacles coming out of it. It's very visually similar to the micromanagers I mentioned in the Lego movie.
Commencing micromanagement!
Where Lego characters capable of original thought are imprisoned in order to have their creative capacity stolen from them. The precursors in Subnautica and the micromanagers in the Lego movie are both representing the same occult concepts, which is referred to in lay terms as the Saturn Mind Control Cube. The Saturn Cube is a huge topic, and I asked a few well-read friends to try and summarize it for us. Jeff from IronAgeArchive.com explains it this way.
Over the course of history, different religions will have different interpretations.
What was that?
I don't know about well-read.
Well studied for sure.
I don't know.
Of what both Saturn and the Cube represent. But we'll also find similar themes and archetypes that overlap among the different beliefs. For example, many ancient cultures thought of Saturn as the furthest celestial body from the sun. And so Saturn was a symbol for darkness and the opposite principle to the light of the sun. And in the Greek-Roman pantheon, Saturn was synonymous with the Titan Cronus, who was the father of the Olympian gods, who themselves represent this kind of immediate solar presence. But Cronus' name was also linked sometimes synonymously with Kronos, the personification of time. So Cronus, or Saturn, was also a type of father time, who ate his children to prevent himself from being overthrown by them. So from this we can see where some Gnostics, Neoplatonists, and other occult groups take Saturn to symbolize or represent the oppressive demiurge, an oppressive father deity who has trapped us inside the quote-unquote darkness of time and space by swallowing us whole. And they then preach this end goal of enlightenment, so that we can escape the belly of time and space and become reunited with the light, which is ultimately our destiny, just as Cronus overthrew his father and his son later overthrew him. Meanwhile, the cube is also a shape that represents three-dimensionality. Just like the rectangle, for example, the Cartesian plane represents two-dimensionality. It's also a six-sided shape, where the number 6 is traditionally associated with this idea of binding or transforming energy into material. And so the Saturn Black Cube is ultimately a symbol within this broader worldview that the material world is a fallen emanation from a higher order that is immaterial, and that ultimately we are living in a sort of matrix-like illusion. And it's also worth noting that many Christian heresies stem from this exact perspective.
In addition to that, an anonymous friend of ours describes the Black Cube this way.
The Saturn Cube can be described as a hive mind god. The meta-god.
I will just say here, so the anonymous friend was Clown Wizard, right? And he and I had a back and forth talking about what the cube was. And then I was like, how do you want to be introduced? Because originally I was going to introduce him as Clown Wizard, our friend with a PhD who largely doesn't spend time on the internet anymore. And he's like, no, he's like, don't worry about it. Just don't introduce me as anything. And so then I was like, oh, he's going to be like this spooky anonymous figure who tells us about the cube.
Have you heard of Metatron? The Saturn Cube is the entrapped physical world which they wish to undo, to get an all-flowing hive of all minds combined into a greater intelligence. The hive is the new messiah they wish to bring about. This can be described succinctly as a metaphorical Tower of Babel. You might say that the beast of revelation is the internet. Note that the true meaning of communism is the anti-individual hive mind. Saturn enveloped his children together, essentially enjoining them. Saturn cut Eden apart with his sickle and they wish to repair it. This repair rejoins all of humanity into one meta-being, using others as a sacrificial holocaust. You could think of the movie The Matrix as the end goal. So in summary, Saturn worship has the end goal of joining humanity together into a giant hive mind meta-life form.
To add to this, Saturn is often associated with the cube because of its hexagon on the northern pole. Sorry, what's that?
Sounds so ominous in that voice. Because I heard the recording prior to you using the voice filter.
Right.
Sounds way better with this.
Yeah, it's way creepier with the auto tune. Before it was text to speech.
It's on something really prominent in a lot of the Gnostic worldviews and a lot of the worldviews that are being pushed today, which is this idea of erasure of self.
Right.
This is something that exists in Eastern religion as well, where the self and the ego are merely illusion. So all of that stuff is bad. We have to get rid of distinctions and we all have to return to the one.
Right. Yeah.
So we can see why New Age is being pushed so hard by the powers that be today, using it as a weapon to kind of get us all to subscribe to this worldview.
Yeah, just that idea that you become one with everything. It's like, oh, maybe that's just communism.
Is the internet. Note that the true meaning of communism is the anti-individual hive mind. Saturn enveloped his children together, essentially enjoining them. Saturn cut Eden apart with his sickle and they wish to repair it. This repair rejoins all of humanity into one meta-being, using others as a sacrificial holocaust. You could think of the movie The Matrix as the end goal. So in summary, Saturn worship has the end goal of joining humanity together into a giant hive mind meta-life form.
To add to this, I feel like I totally missed an opportunity to transition by zooming in on the cube instead of the galaxy appearing and everything going white. While that happened, it should have zoomed in on his cube. That would have been way cooler. Okay. Dang.
Mind meta-life form.
To add to this, Saturn is often associated with the cube because of its hexagon on the northern pole. A hexagon can be seen as a three-dimensional cube trapped in a two-dimensional representation, similar to humans being higher-dimensional beings that are trapped by the demiurge within the dimensions of space and time. So it's no coincidence that to hex someone in witchcraft is to bind them with magic. Or maybe even that Orthodox Jews bind themselves with Teflon, or that the Kaaba at Mecca is a giant black cube that Muslims circle around, much like the rings of Saturn. Even the United Nations Meditation Center also features a black cube, as well as many other statues and structures that are found throughout the world. In popular culture, you see these ideas referenced by the Borg in Star Trek, the Allspark in Transformers, the Puzzle Box in Hellraiser, the Think Tank in the Lego movies mentioned earlier, and the list could go on. In Subnautica, the cube precursors have trapped the Sea Emperor Leviathan, the game's ancient serpent, and the only creature that can create immunity to the corruption in their world. As the player travels deeper and deeper to get to the facility, they face other hostile monstrous leviathans, but also arrive at an unexpected oasis of safety. the game's most impressive tree. This could perhaps be a nod to one of the two most important trees mentioned in the Garden of Eden. Deeper still, guarding the chamber that grants the key to escape this prison world, there are sea dragons who spit fire. This could be a nod to the angels and flaming sword that is described to guard Eden after humanity is cast out in Genesis 3:24. Or it could be a completely unrelated coincidence, and the developers just wanted to give you something cool to dodge because it is a game after all. Once the player outmaneuvers the Fire Guardians, they enter the facility and discover that it was something akin to a scientific lab, containing alien relics. One of the rooms is a dissection lab, where Sea Emperor Leviathan fetus was forcibly removed from its egg for study, which failed to yield a cure to the infectious bacteria. There's also a giant aquarium that the Sea Emperor Leviathan has been trapped in for 1,000 years. You enter the aquarium and discover that the Leviathan is still alive, is female, and has 5 more unhatched eggs. She is friendly to you and tells you that she withheld the cure from the precursors, that she is at the end of her life and isn't strong enough to produce a cure, but if you can gather samples from specific flora scattered throughout the world, you will be able to craft an enzyme that will hatch her 5 eggs. You go on this final scavenger hunt, craft the hatching enzyme in return. The 5 eggs hatch, the adult mother dies. You receive the cure to the bacterial infection. Then the newly hatched Sea Emperor Leviathans leave the aquarium, and you can find them swimming around the map as juveniles, spreading the enzyme, curing the entire planet of the bacteria. This allows you to disable the automated cannon that is quarantining the planet, you build a rocket ship, and then you fly away. Now let's go back to the 2 different interpretations of the Garden of Eden. Either Eden was paradise with no sin, until the serpent tempted humanity to eat the forbidden fruit, corrupting the world, or in the inverted interpretation, the world was already a corrupted prison, and the serpent gifted humanity with the forbidden fruit that gave them the ability to overcome our corruption and become like God. So in Subnautica, the enzyme cure, the collaboration between the Sea Emperor Leviathan and the human character, is the forbidden fruit in Eden, just like the Kraggle in the Lego movie. Several other elements of the Garden of Eden are present, but also inverted. In this retelling, the human, Riley Robinson, not the serpent, is the otherworldly being that interjects itself into the affairs of the planet's native population in order to interfere with what has gone on between them and a different otherworldly being. This is fitting then that the Sea Emperor Leviathan is female, just as Eve was, since she is who was tempted by the serpent in Eden, while Adam was tempted by Eve when he ate the fruit. A more notable inversion in this retelling is the role of death. In Eden, there was no death. God warned Adam and Eve that if they ate from the forbidden fruit that they would die. They instead listened to the serpent who told them that that wouldn't happen, which leads us to today, where people still die and the transhumanists are still desperately clinging to the idea that we will use technology to evolve past death and become gods. In Subnautica, it isn't paradise. Death is already corrupting the world, but eating the forbidden fruit is what is required to overcome death and launch humanity off-planet back into the heavenly cosmos where they belong. Again, like the transhumanists are expecting to use the rest of humanity as fuel to do. In the final cutscene of the game, the dead Sea Emperor Leviathan speaks to you. I feel like if I am going to do those little flashy things, I should probably explain them. Humanity as fuel to do. So it says, remember, real communism has never been tried. And in brackets, all the mass deaths are worth it for the chance that it one day works. Because that's, I think that's the idea that's kind of embedded in here. In the final cutscene of the game, the dead Sea Emperor Leviathan speaks to you telepathically one last time, saying,
We are different, but we go together.
And just as the union of your efforts healed the entire planet you just left, you will now carry the both of you into the heavens. So it is, as above, so below. Once the game credits roll by, an audio clip from the character's employer can be heard, welcoming him to his home planet, saying,
Welcome home to all terror. Permission to land will be granted once you have settled your outstanding balance of 1 trillion credits.
This is a clever joke because they expect to charge you for all the materials you scavenged and used to escape the planet. But it also appropriately suggests that both interpretations of the Garden of Eden understand that someone is keeping track of your actions, that there is a debt that someone's going to have to pick up the tab for in order for any of us to make it home when the credits start to roll by on our lives. So that was the plot of Subnautica. Much like the Lego Movie, while I disagree with the worldview contained in its plot, I still really enjoyed the game. There's no denying that it was an extremely well-crafted work of art. It took me a long time to beat, and even though the game is primarily just grinding for resources, it was an interesting enough world to explore that grind didn't feel like a chore. If I could compartmentalize the plot as a standalone story and ignore what I know about philosophy, theology, and the occult, I would say it was pretty interesting. However, such is the burden of possessing the knowledge of good and evil, I couldn't help but roll my eyes once I started to realize it was yet another pop culture inverted retelling of the Garden of Eden, where the serpent is the hero and death in the world is the fault of some bastardized version of God. If there's any aspect of my comparison to the Garden of Eden that is the weakest, or that I had the most trouble with, it was definitely relating the precursors with God, the Demiurge, and Saturn. I don't think this is a result of the allegory not being there, though. It's just that of all things people disagree on, God tends to be the thing they disagree on the most, so it doesn't always make for a clean one-to-one comparison. Unlike God in the Garden of Eden, the precursors didn't create the world that Subnautica takes place in. The precursors were more of a force that corrupted the planet, failed to fix it, and presumably went extinct after controlling the planet by automated quarantine. But Subnautica wasn't the one to compare the precursors to God, Demiurge, or Saturn. That's what I'm inferring based on the precursors' role in the game's story and how it matches up with what the Gnostics say about their version of a malevolent Old Testament God, and the fact that the game uses cubes as their aesthetic, which matches up with the concept of the Saturn Cube trapping us in the material plane, or in the case of Subnautica, trapping the Sea Emperor Leviathan in the aquarium and your character in the planet via quarantine. Unlike the Lego Movie, I don't know whether this being an inverted Garden of Eden allegory was done intentionally by the developers or not. The Lego Movie was so thorough, so precise, and so packed in its inversion that I think it had to have been completely self-aware. A part of me thinks that something like it could only exist if a bunch of high-level wizards from some secret society of Luciferians wrote the script and drew up the storyboards while getting high off the blood of innocents. I mean, who else would have the money for that many intellectual properties? I don't get the impression that that was the case with Subnautica. It was made by an indie studio, and while someone on the team might have been in the know enough to suggest a few suspicious names or concepts here or there deliberately, it may have also turned out the way it did accidentally. I sometimes wonder if every effort to tell a story that doesn't deliberately set out to do it from a Christian perspective will eventually end up accidentally telling some variation of an upside-down version of Eden. I'm not in a position to know, and I'm definitely biased, but maybe not wrong. I find it a little more suspicious that Subnautica was deliberately saying what it did after learning about the plot to the sequel. Instead of telepathically communicating with the Sea Leviathan, your mind becomes possessed by a precursor entity and you scour the world to build a synthetic body for it to inhabit. So the first game is about a beast out of the sea and the second a beast out of the earth. But maybe that's just the zeitgeist these days. What story is there left for humanity to try and tell, but for us to finally build a body for some demon-possessed AI to inhabit? But I'm glad the story doesn't end there. Until then, we can enjoy our silly games and go back to pretending we're a bunch of man-children who don't really see what's going on.
Engaging ion boosters in
I know I'm crying.
2.
That way, at least we get to have something in common before we're all banned for seeing through the veil.
Oh man!
Since that might cause others to as well. Thank you for watching. Please share this with anyone you think would enjoy it or benefit from hearing it. So, what'd you guys think?
So one of the questions that you pose at the end is whether or not we can even produce fiction that doesn't kind of draw on the same themes. I think there's two aspects to that. One is that it's kind of like pop art influences other art. So there are a lot of influential pieces of fiction that have these themes. One that people might be surprised about is actually Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner.
Right.
Which is about these created humanoid whatever, like creations who overthrow their creator.
Right.
And there's also this part about Deckard kind of learning He kind of goes through different stages of initiatory learning about who he really is. So, we could kind of see that the reason why a lot of fiction have these themes is because they're kind of drawing inspiration from previous works of fiction. The other aspect is also because, we're fallen, and we're kind of blinded by our own pride, and that pride gives us the illusion is that we can judge God. Because towards the end of that video, one of the things you said was the failure of God, right? It's a very common viewpoint that non-believers have today, is that, oh, your God, look at how the world of your God has turned out. He's failed us.
Yeah, it's always this idea that like it's up to the creation to redeem the creation from the creator's mistakes. Like that was, that's certainly what happened in the Lego movie. And but my wife and I were talking about that a little bit as well, because my wife, she understands how stories and narrative, she understands that side of things very well. She deals with that kind of stuff professionally. And I consider her to be like an authority on a lot of these things. And I posed the question to her. I was like, if stories aren't deliberately told from a Christian perspective, maybe not deliberately, but if Christians aren't told from a Christian perspective, will they eventually inevitably end up telling an inverted version of the Garden of Eden, or an inverted kind of gospel message? And we were talking about that a little bit, and we were like, okay, well, what is a story, and what's the most simplified story that you could tell? So for instance, a cat crosses the street, and that's the story, right? And it's like, okay, well, what's embedded in there? My wife was saying there has to be a villain, there has to be a hero, there has to be a victim. And it's like, okay, well, the cat is the hero because it has the courage to cross the street. The victim is also maybe the cats that don't make it across the street. And the villain could be like the humanity's world for making the road a dangerous place, right? That's sort of like higher being that creates the threat in the first place. So we were kind of playing around with that a little bit, but the conclusion that I more or less came to is that I think on a long enough timeline, eventually that probably is what happens, because there's sort of nowhere for stories to eventually go. I started to notice this trend when I was young, and I used to really like watching the 90s Spider-Man animated TV show, and also X-Men. And I started to notice that eventually these superhero shows, they would always introduce either time travel or different dimensions, and it would spoil the whole thing. And I was like, well, eventually if you're telling a story for long enough, you end up doing multi-dimensional weird stuff, because it's just, you have to go somewhere, right? And yeah.
What I think it is that we kind of live in a post-revolutionary age. So any story to really make it has to have a revolutionary essence. I think. What do you mean by
post-revolutionary age?
Oh, we live in the kind of the age where man has chosen to rebel against everything, right?
Okay, right.
Yeah. So even the idea of tradition itself is, that's another chain that to be loosened from us, right? And I think maybe in a more traditional times, maybe stories were told differently, that they didn't have that the revolutionaries were actually the bad guys.
Right. Well, that's, yeah. Isn't that where you get the idea of the left and the right from too, where everyone on the right supported the king, everyone on the left didn't, literally in Parliament? And there are those people who are prone to protect tradition and the people who are prone to overthrow it. And it's appropriate at certain times to do either. But like the people who are sort of following Saturn, you were bringing up in your explanation that it's every generation's obligation to devour or to overcome their father, to defeat their father.
Actually cut their balls off with a scythe.
Yes, yeah. And that's like every generation gets its revolution, or they're asleep at the wheel sort of thing. And eventually you end up just like undermining and destroying things that are good to have last from generation to generation.
We see time and time again every revolution having this utopian ideal that's supposed to come, and actually the revolutions actually end up making things worse, not better.
In a way, I mean, like, you could say that the foundation of the United States is the product of a revolution to have broken away from the monarchy.
I disavow the American Revolution as well, but that's maybe a discussion for another time.
That's interesting. Yeah. I was noticing Sargon of Akkad put out a really good video recently where he is talking about how every once in a while progressives end up making like conservative arguments from a progressive framework. So it's like, basically it's like progressives discover abstinence, or like progressives discover the nuclear family, or progressives discover that like mass immigration is actually attack on the working class. And yeah, just this, it's like every so often these groups kind of figure it out. But yeah, that video, I definitely put a lot of work into it, and not that that's any sort of bearing that it was any good or whatever, but as far as the things that are important to me, that message is, well, that's certainly very important to me. And I usually don't care too much about whether or not people share my content or whether or not it really gets around. As long as I turn on the camera and like there's people on the other side, I'm more or less happy. As long as I'm not like speaking to an empty room, so to speak. But for this video in particular, it's like if people could help me by sharing it, that would mean a lot to me. My goal would be for Jay Dyer or Jonathan Peugeot to see it and to have confirmation that they've seen it.
Oh.
Yep. So I don't know how I would make that happen, but that's sort of my goal, is to get some sort of response from them. And maybe you guys can tell me, because I've been editing it and playing around with it so much that I don't feel like I can see it objectively. But my concern when I was making it was I was like, it's too repetitive. I end up having to tell the plot of the game essentially 3 different times in varying depths. But it's almost like too repetitive. But now sitting here watching it with you guys, I'm like, it is so packed. These concepts are they're such difficult concepts that I almost don't think a person would be able to really understand the video the first time through unless they already kind of know the concepts. What are your thoughts?
And I think you say something interesting there. It's like, you don't really care if people see it. Because there's kind of two different approaches that I think about. I think every YouTuber might have aspects of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, yeah, we kind of do care if people see it. It feels good for people to kind of see the work that we put into these things, right?
Right.
Then there's another approach, which is that kind of like the way every human being is naturally drawn to the truth,
mm-hmm.
towards things that are good. Right? And when we discover these things, there's also this natural feeling that we need to share that. Kind of like out of this sense of love, really.
Right.
We don't want people that we care about to be misled or to also this misunderstanding between people that you love, it's kind of a pain point too.
Mm-hmm.
Your own family doesn't understand your views on something like politics,
mm-hmm.
like COVID, for example. That hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a more wholesome way of looking at it, merely than just saying, "Oh, I want the views, I want the clicks." Just that ultimately, this is an act out of something spiritual.
Right. I mean, it kind of comes down to what a person's motivation for engaging with these platforms are too. Because, like, if I were a YouTuber and I was making my income, my livelihood off of YouTube, I would want my work to be widely spread, and I would want to be successful on the platform. That would be an extension of me being like the best that I can at the thing that I'm doing. Just like in my other professional endeavors, I am doing the best that I can to be good at it, because, you know, that's what it is to like properly apply yourself to something. But because my purpose for being on YouTube isn't to be a YouTuber, it's more or less an extension of me being a sort of social animal. It's like, this is just a way for me to engage with my friends, and a way for me to kind of see what other people are thinking, and a way for me to maybe try and like equip people with the words of ideas that they might be thinking, or that they haven't quite come around to yet. Or, you know, there's a degree of, you hope that other people don't feel alone, because you know how much people get censored. And so it's more of a community thing than it is it's more of a community thing, as opposed to just a reach the widest number of people possible. And if you're engaging on a sort of community level, then, well, you care more about quality than quantity. So yeah, like, you know, destroy my audience as long as I have like 12 good people who I can interact with, right? Or 11.
I don't know. I haven't completely thought this through yet, but I think there might even be some element of truth to that, to people who do really stupid things on the internet, like OnlyFans. To a degree, it's also because there's this pain of feeling people don't understand them or something, you know?
Sure. Yeah. And, you know, I'm not trying to set up some sort of dichotomy where if something is large, then that means that there's no quality there, because there's some people who have large audiences and they have really great communities and they're making like awesome stuff. And, you know, something being small isn't necessarily an indicator that it's uncorrupted or whatever, right? But anyway, I bring all this up because it's like, for most of my stuff, yeah, like I say, I don't really care whether or not it's shared or whether or not other people necessarily see it unless they're interested. But this video in particular, and same with the Lego movie as well, it's like, this is the message that I care about. And this is the thing that it's like, the themes present in this video and the Lego movie, if I had one message I could share with the whole world, it would probably be what's contained in there, in these videos. Granted, if I were sharing it with the whole world, I would, I don't know, I'd probably take more time on it or something, right? But that's kind of where I'm coming from. And yeah.
In a way, this kind of transitions to the thing that I was mentioning earlier too.
Okay.
Which is that when I first started on YouTube, the idea was actually came from the fact that me and Bill were hanging out. Every Friday night we would play pool.
Mm-hmm.
Then we would go to this kind of a restaurant / cafe place and hang out, and probably be there for 2 hours or something.
Hmm.
And then we were having all of these interesting conversations. At least we found them interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we record some of this stuff?
Hmm.
And then this natural inclination, okay, yeah, let's put it on the internet too.
Right.
So it kind of came out of this, you know, at the time, yeah, there was this big cultural phenomenon happening on YouTube, which was Kekistan and all this meme culture stuff too.
Yeah.
So there's kind of two aspects, right? On the one hand, we're seeing what's going on, and on the other aspect, we feel like we got something to contribute, right?
Hmm.
And then, so what I wanted to talk about was, one, my experience with Gnosticism, and two, kind of some of the challenges that I've been dealing with in the last few years. Because in the time that you've known me, in the last 2 or so years, you've seen kind of up close that like I've been struggling to put out content, right?
Yeah, I keep kind of
so,
wondering what's become of the what was that collaboration we did?
And what happens? Yeah, so what happens is things get bumped, right? So I do one thing, and then another thing comes along, and then it bumps the previous thing down sometimes, right?
Right. What was that even
that
called?
thing is like,
what was the movie called? It's gonna drive me crazy.
One Bedroom.
There we go. That's right. Okay.
We did an analysis of One Bedroom. That's like number 5 on the queue right now. But one of the challenges has been this: when you encounter a new worldview, then it's not like most people, when they adopt a new worldview, it's not like they understand the worldview entirely. Pick up a few axioms, and they're like, "Oh, this all sounds right," and then they go and read into the literature, right?
Right.
It's like libertarianism. You don't read all the libertarian writers and then you become a libertarian.
Right.
You hear a few axioms that sound nice, and then you're like, "Oh, I should look into this." Then you get deeper and deeper into it. So the same thing happened to me twice in the last 2 years, right? At first, it was kind of perennialist, truth in all religions worldview, right? I got really into that. Then through that, I discovered Orthodox Christianity. Then it was like, oh, now I have to reconsider all of my previous assumptions because I feel like this is more true.
Right.
When that happens to you twice in 2 years, it's a big challenge. Everything really, it kind of turns your life upside down twice.
Yeah,
that's kind of, yeah,
and that's
been the difficulty.
Well, that's kind of like forever going to be a difficulty too, I think, because we're never going to make our like completed work.
Yeah.
And that's something that we just, I don't know, have to accept is you make your thing and you put it out and it never feels finished. And you're always trying to fix the things that were wrong with it until you eventually die before that happens.
Yeah. That's how the whole bumping process happens, because once I find something new, it's like, oh, I should put this out before I put the other thing out, because something in this needs to precede that, contextualize that. So that's, I guess, I kind of have to learn to be a little bit more forgiving of myself in some way.
Yeah, part of the problem that I have is that, like, I mean, this stream isn't necessarily the best example because it's just a, whatever, a goofy graphic in the background or whatever, but I probably overproduce what I do for live streams. And I kind of get to a point where, like this Subnautica video, I should have been able to just make a little 5-minute thing that explains the 4 key points that are driving why it is that I'm coming to the conclusions that I'm coming to. Like that's initially what I set out to do. I was like, this will be a fast little video. I'll basically do it in an afternoon. And I can do it because it isn't such a big workload. And then once I started, it just took on a life of its own. And it's so hard for me to engage with any sort of endeavor now without it being so like all encompassing. And it's even, for instance, say I'm going to try and learn a new calisthenic maneuver or some sort of like new physical feat. And when you're starting out, maybe it takes you like an afternoon and then you learn something that you never were able to do in your whole life. You're able to figure that out that afternoon. And then you have enough of the things that you've been able to pick up in an afternoon that, well, now it takes you a week to be able to learn the next sort of tier of skills. And so you start to soak up the things that you can take within, that you need to practice over the span of a week. And then eventually it's like, okay, well, for me to get a new calisthenic move, this is like several month-long process where I'm spending like, whatever hours a day until I can get that whatever hand balancing maneuver or whatever the thing is. And then eventually, you get to a point where diminishing returns kicks in, and you're like, in order for me to get to any new ground, it just takes so much work. So that's kind of where I'm at with everything.
In that sense, are we leveling up? That's why we're taking longer to do work.
I almost think that it's the opposite. I almost see it as a bit of well, I guess it's leveling up in the sense that you would hope that the quality of your work is increasing. However, you should be able to demonstrate mastery without it taking so long.
Okay.
It's like, a person who really understands an idea can explain it simply. And I'm not there.
Yeah.
And the things that I need to do in my life that I don't get around to doing because they take so long, it's like the problem isn't that they take so long. The problem is that I have entered into this place where I've allowed so many periphery things to hijack it. Yeah. That's definitely me anyway.
The other thing I was going to mention was Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the appeal. Let's see. I guess one of the things about us in modern times is that everybody on both the left and the right can kind of sense that there's something wrong with the modern world.
Yeah.
Everybody is kind of scrambling for solutions. And we all kind of think, in modern times, we all kind of think of our own intellect as the judge of all things, as the final arbiter.
Okay.
That kind of comes out of the Enlightenment tradition as well, that man's rational mind, it's kind of like the worship of that. Also the worship of man's will, because we kind of view ourselves as having this ability to to kind of master the world through our will, right?
Right.
It's the will to power, the will to dominate our environment. So there's certainly something very attractive about these Gnostic ideas, and all of these New Age ideas along those similar themes. Then there's also something very attractive about thinking. One of the things, if you're trying to kind of free yourself from all forms of limitations, eventually you'll come to this limitation of the physical world.
Yes.
So that's where New Age kind of kicks in. New Age tells you, oh, but wait, you can transcend the physical world as well.
Right.
Because guess what? It's all illusion. It's all Maya, right? Your true self is out there in the ether, and it's meant to be connected with the ethereal plane.
Right.
So all of these ideas really tie together to kind of appeal to this sentiment of the age, this zeitgeist that we have. And whereas Christianity, on the other hand, it kind of takes a certain recognition of your own limitations, and it takes a humbling of yourself to finally say, okay, my intellect can't be the measure of all things. Even just this week, I was trying to come up with an intellectual argument for God. Like, why should one accept Christian doctrine and believe in God? And I shopped this question around to a number of people in my network, and I actually got a pretty good response, kind of put things in perspective. And this response comes from another YouTuber, Anglo Ortho. Go check out his channel. Another Orthodox Christian. And he was saying that ultimately our theory of knowledge doesn't come from reasoning. It doesn't come from using purely the intellect to make sense of the world. Ultimately, knowledge is revealed by God. So this idea of trying to reason ourselves back to God it's kind of another vain exercise in a sense.
Right.
It's kind of like another like act of pride to say
Yes.
I'm going to use reason and logic all the way back to God.
Yes, like science itself is observation, and we're only able to observe the things that are, revealing and presenting themselves to us.
Even in the scientific worldview, there's this assumption that what we're observing actually corresponds to the truth. That's not always the case. We can see with things like optical illusions, we can see with things like how scientific paradigms change over time. Right? All of these things suggest that what we observe is not direct one-to-one correspondence with reality.
Right. Yeah.
So it really takes this acknowledgement of the limitations of humankind, right, to finally say, okay, then if man can't be the judge of all things, then what can? It takes that breakthrough to finally be more open to something like Christianity.
Yeah, but why do you think people go from the non-Christian perspective? Why do you think it so often goes into the realm of through our actions we can redeem creation? Because it's one thing to say that I can be a good enough person to be able to redeem myself. People will have that idea, or it more comes down to when people have that perspective, they more think that there's just no such thing as judgment. And they think that, well, God wouldn't really be that upset with people for having done things wrong. And surely I haven't done things that wrong that he would really be so upset about. That's kind of like the way that people justify things to themselves. And so maybe they give themselves a pass. But why do you think that the Gnostics and these other groups, they'll go from redemption, they'll go past redemption on the individual level, and they'll think that they can like redeem creation, and they'll try and take the mantle of God themselves?
It also begins with this idea that world is corrupted, right? That it's fallen. It always begins there, and then kind of like ethical question. Okay, what should be done?
Right.
So it kind of depends on where you get your idea of what is good. And for modern thinking, what is good, a lot of times it reduces to what I think is good, what I feel is good.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to the worship of the will then.
Mm-hmm.
And you being the arbiter of all things. So, and then everybody kind of has this vision of how the world ought to look in their perfect world, right?
Right.
And so it kind of makes sense. If you worship your own will, then you should manifest your will in the world.
Or at the very least, pursue affirmation addiction and never get triggered again. And ban all the people for making edgy Twitter jokes in order to make the world a better place. Yeah, I don't know. They're pretty lofty concepts.
I mean, I got thrown for a bit of a loop last week when I met up with an atheist friend for the first time in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a filmmaker friend of mine, so he was pitching me some film ideas that he had. And one was this idea about man marrying robots. And we got into this whole debate about what makes a person.
Okay.
And then because he was arguing that the robots should someday should have recognized human rights.
That's like iRobot.
Yeah. And so I was asking him, okay, so in your definition, what makes a human?
Right.
Then he kind of gives this dialectic answer that at times, over the course of history, there'll be theses and antitheses, and we'll synthesize that into a higher recognition of what makes a human. Then it's just, and then I tried to question him. Okay, on what is your standard that makes that legitimate? So if we have this new definition of human rights, then what makes that legitimate?
Right.
Then they don't have answers for any of these questions, right?
No.
To them, it's all whatever I feel like.
And just the arrogance of thinking that sort of like you are the one who defines what a human is. Like you are the one that grants them their humanity. Yeah. Like that, in a lot of ways, that's a big problem that I have with abortion advocates. Not just the element that they're taking someone's life, but the very philosophical concept that something becomes a human when a woman says it is. It's like, that's not where we get our definition of whether or not we're a human from. It doesn't come from there. There are things that are innate. So even the fact that we would build these robots or whatever, that we would then bestow upon them the definition of human. It's like, well, that's kind of missing the point of what humans are. Like they are that thing. They're not just designated it. It's inherent.
There you go. Yeah. How bizarre that a computer chip to them is a human, but an 8-month-old viable fetus is not a human.
Yeah. When I was making this Subnautica analysis, there was another piece of content, another game that I was going to reference. And then once I started to pull the clips for that reference, I almost turned it into its own video because it was like, oh my goodness, what this game is saying too. Have you ever heard of the game Ghost Runner?
Sounds familiar.
Ghost Runner. It's a pretty new game. It's about a here, I'll just pull something up.
The fast-paced first-person thing, right?
Yeah, I'll put this up in the background for people. Hey, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I really like the game. Like it's that sort of, it's my favorite genre, which is parkour melee combat. If there were close range firearms, then I would enjoy that even more. Like if there were pistols, that's even cooler. But I love that like fast paced parkour melee combat. And this is a game where you're essentially just like a ninja in a sort of cyberpunk future or whatever. But when I was going through the game, there were some things that I noticed that kind of caught me. I don't know if you would be able to see this. No, you wouldn't be able to see this when I share my screen with you.
I'm watching it on YouTube anyway.
Oh, you are?
So
okay. Okay, so you can see this symbol, right? That I just put up? You can see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got, imprisoned no longer. And this is a poster that's like scattered throughout the game. And so I look at this and I'm like, well, what does this say to you? What do you think it is? In a story about like transhumanism and
double helix DNA.
Exactly. Yes. I'm so glad you picked up on that. Yeah. So you have the Freemason colors or whatever, right? Of the white, black, and red. And then it's an X or a double helix DNA strand. Yeah. And then you have the third pillar, the synthetic pillar running through it. So when I started to see that, I was like, okay, what's this game getting into? And I sort of only half pay attention to the plots when I play these games, right? So then I started to pay attention. And it was it's just like you're this creation that's overthrowing its creator. But and so anyway, once I started to pull the footage from this thing, I went into full-on analysis mode because then I needed to understand it in its entirety. And I ended up actually figuring out who the writer was of the plot. Like I looked into the credits, I looked for the guy on Twitter, couldn't find him on Twitter, found him on Facebook. I sent him a message that was just some questions that I had about the plot. What I was trying to figure out was was this deliberately an allegory? Like, was the architect the demiurge? And And he ended up not being able to answer a lot of it because he's like, look, you know, the sequel is coming out and I'm not allowed to spoil things. Yeah, this game, it is so much in line with what you're describing. You had the conversation with your friend. It's like the same sort of premise about what is and what isn't a human. And at what point, like, a robotic entity could become human, or alternatively, so there's two different sides of it. You could build a robot from the ground up, or let's not call it a robot, let's call it a cyborg, because maybe it doesn't just use robotic pieces. Maybe it has elements of flesh woven into it. Like it uses maybe cadaver pieces or something, right? So you have this cyborg that you build from the ground up. At what point does that become human, if it ever does? Or the alternative is if you take a human and you corrupt it, you turn it into a cyborg and you corrupt it with technology, whatever, at what point does it no longer become a human? Because both of them are going to like reach the same place. And where does that transition occur?
Yeah.
But this
maybe one way of solving that is to say that it's not necessarily, there's always like a kind of a margin in all categories, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
All systems is going to be margin that's unaccounted for, as Jonathan Pageau would say, right?
Right. And that's why the transgender argument is always, like I'll hear a lot of times there's that judge in the States who they're trying to figure out whether she's going to be, I don't know, Supreme Court or something. And she's being questioned and they asked her how if she can define men or women. Sorry, if she can define what a woman is. And she said, no, she can't. And what I'm hearing people say is that, well, the people who think it's so easy to define what a woman is, they just haven't heard of intersex. And like we would say that the definition of a woman is an adult human female. It's very simple, very easy. But they're like, well, you're not taking into account intersex. And it's like, well, yeah, obviously we know that people who are intersex exist. But just because there are those variations or there's those entities that are kind of on the margin, that doesn't mean that the categories themselves no longer exist.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what progressives always try to do, is take the margin and say, see, your categories are invalid.
Yes. Yes, they make the exception the rule. Yeah. It's like, well, of course, abortion should be allowed because what about the time that it threatens the mother's health? It's like, okay, well, like we can grant that, but why does that justify all the other ones where that's not the case? Yeah. Anyway, those were kind of my thoughts. Maybe we'll keep it kind of short here. Is there anything you want to wrap up with?
No, I mean, I was just about to go down another Freemason rabbit hole, but I think it's gonna.
Well, if it's there, let's hear it. But if we have to like struggle for it, then we'll leave it for another time.
Okay. Well, it's just going back to this Ghost Runner thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who the quote is attributed to, but it was like Masonry is Kabbalah and Kabbalah is Freemasonry. And
so Masonry is. Can you say that again?
Masonry is Kabbalah and Kabbalah is Freemasonry.
Okay.
And I find it so interesting because in the general Kabbalistic worldview, they have this thing kind of like emanation theology or process. I don't know if it's called process, but it's like this process of the universe unfolding, right? So the universe self-creates these different levels to it as an inevitable process. Then some Kabbalists will view the role of man is to kind of redeem it again.
Right.
By kind of picking up these pieces and kind of reintegrating them into the new Adam Kadmon.
Yes.
And then you hear Michio Kaku say, "Oh, it turns out that the Kabbalists were right about a lot of things.
Right.
A lot of scientists are very into the Kabbalah ideas as well, right?
Mhm.
This idea of creating the new man, like picking up the broken pieces of the universe and reintegrating them back into a new man. And so look at transhumanism, and it has that exact same pattern, where man is this flawed meat creature, but we can pick up the pieces from the universe, right? We can pick up these technological pieces, and we could piece a new man back together.
Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the idea of Saturn devouring all of his children and trying to envelop them all into the same being, and that the hive meta god. Yeah. And I've heard of people, like, this is why I kind of go back to the idea that where I was saying on a long enough timeline, do all stories that aren't Christian stories, do they end up becoming inverted Garden of Eden narratives or inverted gospels? Because like, I've heard a lot of these kind of new age religious-y people, they are trying desperately to synthesize all religions, and they think that they're going to get there. They think that they're going to be able to get rid of any contradiction between all of them, and there will be this like world peace. Everyone will live in unity, and there will be a place for all religions under this sort of same umbrella, this new world religion, whatever you want to call it, that'll have synthesized everything.
Yeah, and that was in the UNESCO manifesto that I told you about 2 years ago.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And we would say that, well, like, definitionally, it's not possible for Christianity to fall into that, because Christianity is just as much defined by exclusion as it is inclusion. And you can't separate that. And anyone who attempts to merge the Christian beliefs in with these other belief systems, they've walked away from Christianity by having done it. Like, that's what the progressives are, and that's what the progressives do. But is that the same thing as, like, you know, basically all the other stories ending up in the same place? And I think that they do. I think eventually they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that some of the Eastern religions will try to argue against that and say, oh, but the Buddha teaches to get rid of earthly desires and something like that, right?
It's like, that sounds a lot like a Gnostic perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the Buddhists don't deny that there is this connection between physical form and spirituality, right? They do meditation, they do fasting.
Right.
So they're clearly, it's not entirely do nothing, right? To them, there still is a physical form to spirituality.
Well, that's almost more of the difference between what's the, like, Vedic tradition and the sort of Hindu ascetic tradition, where Buddha was like an adept ascetic, and he took that hard road really far, and then kind of like lightened up a little bit and realized that it wasn't about depriving yourself or excess. It's like some sort of middle of the road right way. Yeah, he's almost in a way like the ultimate centrist. Yeah. And I know that a lot of people would hear my perspective about these things, and they would be like, well, that's just something that a person who is ignorant would say, because there's obviously significant differences between all these other beliefs. And if a person thinks that they're the same, they just don't know enough about them to see how they're different.
We're not saying that they're the same. We're saying that they end up in the same place.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
That's a different argument. Yeah.
That's true. Many different roads, same place.
Actually, yeah. Someone posted a quote from Matthew 7 earlier today. It's kind of related. It's like the part about entering through the narrow gate, right? Many people will take the wide gate, and it leads to destruction.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
only
like
wide and narrow gate to the truth.
Yeah, and it isn't there something to the effect of, like, a thief doesn't take the regular entrance or enter through the gate. They try and find another way. And that goes back to what you were saying about how people are always trying to like get ahead of death or get ahead of the things that get ahead of redemption.
Yeah.
They're trying to get to the same place, but they're doing it wrong. Yeah. They're trying to short circuit it.
I think one of the things that bothers people the most is us saying that there's only one way.
Yes.
It immediately triggers this thing in the human mind where it's like, no way, there's got to be another way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jesus has already told us, no one goes to get to the Father but through him.
Yeah. And it's and if you were to say that, well, there's one way, part of what's so offensive about that is it's like, you know, what people want to say is that we all have our opinions, and I'll respect you if you respect me. And so that kind of requires that we both almost like kind of like give each other permission to be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, well, it doesn't really matter whether or not we're wrong. But what's embedded within our perspective is this idea that, well, no, this isn't just my perspective. This is God's perspective. And he says that it really matters if you're wrong. And they will then like map that onto us and say that, well, that's just what you think. And we're saying like, no, that's what God thinks. And they'll be like, oh, well, you're wrong about that. And so it's like, okay, so we can't, you agree that we can't all be right. The difference though is that I'm willing to say that, like, if I'm wrong, it doesn't change what the truth is. Whereas they tend to not believe in the truth at all. Well, they don't tend to believe in a sort of objective truth. They just believe that there's the people who are so arrogant that they think they know what the truth is, and it's not available to anyone. That's what I hear a lot of.
And in a lot of their worldviews, they also have trouble counting for how one can actually make contact with the truth. For example, if you think that everything in the material world is illusion, it's all Maya.
Right.
How do you know that everything is all Maya if you believe everything is all Maya?
Right.
If you believe that everything in the material world is a lie, couldn't your belief itself be a lie?
Right.
It's very difficult in a lot of these worldviews to account for how a human being can actually know the truth. Whereas,
and then they sort of, in a way, give
Christians,
up.
It's very simple, right? God reveals the truth.
Right. Yeah. And so in a sense, they sort of give up. They say, because we can never know the truth, therefore, in a way, there is no truth that's available to us. Whereas the Christian is saying that, no, there is God's revealed truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's probably as good a place to leave it as any. What is the next project that you're working on? What's number one on your list?
I did meet up with Bill in December.
Nice. How'd that go?
Yeah, it was okay. You know, I mean, we're still good friends. We can still chat about a lot of things. It's just, you know, certain subjects are harder to chat about now. But
yeah,
other than that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you can like just leave room for each other disagreeing, I think you guys can still put out wicked content. Like you guys' conversations were always excellent, even though it's like, you know, both of you guys' perspectives. I mean, I haven't talked to Bill, but I imagine that both of you guys' perspectives have changed a lot since then. It didn't change doesn't change the like dynamic that you guys had in the sort of meeting of minds.
Yeah.
So you'll be.
Yeah, there's a recording that I did with Bill, and there's a couple other things. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
That was in December, so you can just see how long these things take.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I do hope to eventually get around to the free guy analysis. If I do, it'll be pretty low effort. Yeah, there might be the odd stream here or there. I basically only stream if I feel like I have something to say. That's why it's so infrequent. So sometimes things come up and I want to do a stream. Otherwise, yeah, free guy, which I hope is going to be low effort, but I don't really know if I can. And And that's really it. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Again, please share the video. I'm going to post it in the chats here one more time. So please find a way. I was, when I was doing research for the Subnautica video and research about the Saturn Cube or whatever, I came across this like Reddit thread where someone was saying, hey guys, I think that the Lego movie has like the cube of Saturn imagery in it. And this was like a few months ago, this person had posted it. And I was just like, oh man, that person should be the kind of person who would have come across my video, you know, analyzing it. So I don't know where people like find videos. Like, I don't know what it takes in order for these things to like gain any traction or whatever. But yeah, again,
hopefully at ironagearchive.com.
Yes, that's the place. If anyone wants to see where the cool videos are, go to ironagearchive.com. But yeah, ideally, I would, the goal is to have Jay Dyer or Jonathan Peugeot to have confirmation that they've watched it, or as a consolation, I'll accept if Jordan Peterson sees it. I don't think he's as equipped to be able to engage with the content as the other two guys are. But yeah, anyway, let's call it there.
Well, Peterson does get it. He just doesn't necessarily accept the conclusions, I guess.
Maybe. But it's almost like, but then that means he doesn't get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's like he can recognize what symbols are, and he knows the old myths and the old stories, but he doesn't get how any of it like fits together. So not how any of it, but he doesn't get how the critical parts of it fit together. Like, do you know who Adam Green is?
Adam Green.
Yeah.
Adam
I
Green.
think his content is called No More News, like KNOW, No More News.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar.
Okay, so he's a guy I came across somewhere on Twitter, and he'll do live streams. Turns out he's been around for a little while, and he gets censored big time. Like, he's been on all the major platforms, and he just gets taken down. He's lost his YouTube channel. He was kicked off DLive.
I've seen this guy before.
Yeah. And he's one of those guys who's like very much into the JQ, you know? And I came across him when I was trying to learn about like what Kabbalah was. And he's very clearly spent a lot of time researching Kabbalah. And he would have people on who are like, you know, they seem like they're experts, or they've certainly spent a lot of time trying to understand it and everything. And so I would hear these conversations with these guys explaining what it is. And I was like, okay, I'd never heard that before. I haven't researched these things, but these guys have. That's, you know, whatever, that's interesting. But more recently, he's been kind of on a bit of a warpath against Christianity, because he believes that Christianity is essentially just this like Jewish psyop that is meant to pacify Christians. And I've heard this perspective plenty of times before. Big Tech says, did you see my debate with Adam Green on the Kill stream? No, I haven't seen that. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, that's Galaxy Jesus. So Galaxy has debated him. I'll watch that right after this, actually. But yeah, that's sort of his perspective, is that Christianity is this Jewish psyop, and he equates being Jewish with being bad. That's why that makes it a bad thing. Whereas we would say, I had to make the point in a tweet towards him where I was like, it's like, well, you believe that Jews have the power to transform anything they touch into not being true. Whereas I believe that the truth supersedes like anyone, any group that touches it. Like, the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter who it came to first or whatever, right? But anyway, I bring all this up because his understanding of Christianity is like so messed up, and he knows the stories, but because he can only see it through this framework of his like really embittered view towards Judaism, he completely misunderstands Christianity. And I feel like there's a degree of that happening with Jordan Peterson too, where it's like, yeah, sure, he knows all the stories, but he doesn't get the difference between some of them or how they really fit together. And otherwise he would get it. But apparently his daughter has come around though.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into it. Someone told me that, but
That's what I heard too.
mm-hmm. Anyway, let's wrap it up there. Thanks for watching, guys. Check out Jeff at IronAgeArchive.com. You can check out my streamer links in the chat. And yeah, we'll see you again.
Bring me the power to get the job done!
It's been 5 years, 72 days, and 18 hours. For 10 years, we lived and died together. You couldn't possibly understand.
You say that, like, soldiers and humanity are two different things. And soldiers aren't machines. We're just people.
Let me the government. I'm here to make sure you and your other guys kiss. Hey, be the government again. I want to take your gun. I could go get a definitely shoot you.